Hi everyone, welcome back to Lifting the Lamp. Today's video is about the green-eyed monster, jealousy. And this is an important topic to understand because jealousy can turn even the closest relationships toxic. So it's an important thing that we understand jealousy, we know how to identify it. And that is the purpose of this video. I'll be looking at the ways that jealousy has been normalized in our society, how jealousy operates and arises, and what we can do if somebody is jealous of us. So this is an area that I have a lot of experience in, unfortunately. I have had a lot of different friend groups over the years. I've known a lot of people, but I've only retained a very small number of long-term friendships from any of those groups. And the reason is jealousy. The jealousy of other people towards me. Whether that's the friends that I had from my first high school or esoteric groups that I've been a part of, well, one in particular, where people saw the need to tear me down instead of celebrating my accomplishments. And this is also manifested in some of the political circles that I have moved in as well. So many of my friendships or associations have ended in betrayal or disappointment for me because of this issue of jealousy towards me. And people who I trusted and confided in suddenly turning into people who wanted to throw me under the bus or betray me in some way. And that's something that caused me a lot of pain in the past. I'd like to take those unpleasant experiences and try and turn them into something positive. Use the knowledge that I gained from those experiences to help other people to avoid really toxic situations in their own life. You know, all the great writers on yoga talk about how part of the spiritual path is associating with people who are resonating at the same level as you, who are on the same wavelength as you, so that they can reinforce your higher aspirations, your spiritual aspirations, instead of dragging you down to their level. And part of that is getting rid of the jealous people in your life, because they will go out of their way to drag you down. Based on some of the comments that I've received on my videos, people seem to see the big three of negative personality traits that other people have as being anger, pride, and jealousy. But why is jealousy such a big deal in today's society? Well, I think in many ways we have fostered a culture of jealousy in modern times. The way that politics operates, the way that narratives are spun in the media and entertainment. If there is somebody who is more educated or somebody who, for whatever reason, has had a slightly better life than us, we feel the need to tear that person down, to make that person feel ashamed of themselves, and to criticize that other person. And at the root of that, the reason why so many people are like that is because it's not for any righteous reason of making things fairer for everyone, as these kinds of instincts towards tearing people down are often couched, but rather it's all to do with the fact that people think they should be on a pedestal, and so they need to tear down anybody who is more successful than them, or anybody who seems to be getting more attention than them, so that they can take that person's place. It's not an altruistic instinct at all. And part of the reason for that as well is because we have created a culture that is so materialistic, that is so centered around craving and grasping and greed, that there is so many reasons to be jealous of another person now, because there's so many things that we think we ought to have, which another person may have. Instead of valuing things like positive virtues or positive personality traits as things to aspire towards. Social media doesn't help with this situation, because on social media platforms we have a very curated version of our life that we present to the world. And so it looks as though we're happy all the time, that we're successful all the time. People don't see the struggles, the bitter struggles that we have to go through to get even a millimeter of progress in our lives. And so they just see somebody who has more than them and they think that that's unfair, and that feeds their jealousy even more. And there also is just a real sense of entitlement among people in today's society. People increasingly feel like they should just have things instead of having to work for them. And so they don't see the value in when other people have something that they've worked for, and they simply resent that person for having something that they don't have. Because it's all about us and what we have. And this impulse towards jealousy has become so prevalent in our society. It's become so ubiquitous that now we actually tell somebody that we're jealous of them as a compliment. It's like, if you have something nice, your friend will say, "Oh my God, I'm so jealous. That's so amazing for you." Like, really? Seriously? Your first reaction is to say that you're jealous of a person, not that you're happy for them, that you're jealous of them. And not only that, you're framing it as a good thing, that that person would want you to be jealous of you, to feel lesser than you, as though it's a positive trait to want to make people feel lesser than you. There's just so much wrong with that expression, but it's so common now. It's more common than just saying, "Congratulations, I'm happy for you." So that's the point that we're starting at with civilization, when we're trying to get past jealousy and trying to overcome situations where jealousy can arise. So we've got a long way to go. But the first thing that we can do is to understand exactly how jealousy arises to start off with, because once we understand a thing, it is much easier to get rid of it, or to avoid it at the first sign of it showing its ugly head. So let's unpack jealousy step by step, each step in the thought process of a person, which then eventually develops into jealousy, and why each step of the thought process is wrong in some way, is mistaken in some way. The first way that jealousy arises is somebody sees that somebody has more than them, and they attribute blame to that person for having more than them. Or if they don't attribute blame outright, they have the same kinds of negative feelings towards that person as if they were to blame for that unequal situation. And this is the first misapprehension that leads to jealousy, because if somebody has more than you, unless they have stolen something from you, or they have had some kind of relationship of exploitation with you, another person really isn't to blame for having more than you. They didn't go out of their way to deprive you to make themselves more successful than you. But that's the way that we perceive people when the seed of jealousy begins to take root. Usually people have something that another person has for one of two reasons. First, because they've worked for it. They've worked really, really hard, sometimes for years, to accomplish a certain level of personal excellence or to obtain a thing that they were trying to get. And without all of that hard work, they'd have nothing. So that's reason number one, why somebody might have something that you don't. The second reason is just luck. They happen to have more favourable circumstances than you, in which case they're still not to blame for having more than you. But you see, jealousy comes from the ego. And so when a person is beginning to feel jealous, they don't go through this rational thought process of why the other person has a thing, because those truths, those facts are inconvenient. They don't vindicate that person's sense of being victimized, of being less, of being deprived in some way. So their ego won't let them accept it. It's easier to just despise the other person. And then the next stage in the thought process of somebody who is becoming jealous is, this person has something that I don't have, that's not fair, becoming, I should have that thing. And this too is related to not understanding or wanting to understand why one person has something that another person might not have. And then a third, more insidious development of this jealousy that begins to well up in a person is that I should have that thing that that person doesn't have, and that person shouldn't have that thing anymore. And when you reach that stage of jealousy, you've created the seed of ill will. You've created an intent almost, or the basis of an intent, to deliberately deprive that person either of the thing that they have that you want, or to deprive them of something else that's important to them in order to compensate for the fact that they have more than you. But why? Why is it not enough? Why is it not enough to just say, I want that thing? Why does the ego compel people to then, like Attila the Hun once said, take on the mentality that it is not enough that I should succeed, other people must fail? It's because, once again, these feelings of jealousy are coming from the ego. And the ego wants to be the center of attention. It wants to be in the spotlight. It wants to be the one that is special, that stands out from everybody else. And in order for the ego to be in that position, other people can't have the same things that you have. And so if you want something that makes you seem special to other people, and somebody else has that thing, of course they need to be deprived of it. And this is the twisted logic of the ego. And this is the twisted logic that jealousy inspires in people. And you see quite often, although it's not as applicable in today's interconnected age as perhaps it was in the past, that jealousy often arises between people who have very close relationships with each other, who are very familiar with each other, and who are therefore very familiar with one another's affairs. And for this reason, jealousy is even more insidious, because where you have resentment and jealousy arising towards somebody that you're very close to, who trusts you, who confides in you, it's very easy to take advantage of that person's trust, to really hurt them in a big way. And this is where situations of betrayal arise. You know, when Dante wrote his Inferno, his commentary on sinfulness and the sinful nature of humanity, and he tried to class all of the different sins of humanity in the order of their seriousness in his metaphor of the 9 circles of hell. The very lowest circle, the very worst layer of hell, was reserved for traitors like Judas, like Brutus, people who had been close to another, close as brothers, you might say. And even though there was that relationship of brotherhood, they betrayed the other person because they resented them. So that really highlights just how serious jealousy is, and just how wrong it is, and how despicable it is to be possessed by the spirit of jealousy. So, understanding jealousy, what are you supposed to then do with that knowledge? Well, knowing how serious jealousy is, you can now be aware of how important it is to notice when jealousy is starting to crop up in your relationships. And some of the things that are warning signs is perhaps you catch a person giving you a certain look, or perhaps you catch them making comments that they didn't make before. Perhaps they try and minimize your accomplishments where before they would have encouraged them. There's little ways that you start to notice jealousy creeping in. Perhaps they start to exclude you from things that they would have usually included you together with other people, adding more secrecy and having more to hide in the relationship. These are things that show you that jealousy is starting to creep in. In terms of how to combat that, sometimes people get over it. Sometimes they pull their head in and they realize how much they benefit from having a friendship with a particular person. But sometimes jealousy can become so serious that it's only a matter of time before the friendship comes to an end. So if you start to notice that there's a jealous person in your life, the best thing for you to do is probably to not necessarily cut that person off completely, but definitely start to minimize the amount of time you spend around that person and start keeping them at an arm's length at the very least, because that is a relationship that could become toxic. Unfortunately, if someone becomes jealous of you, there's not really much that you can do to undo that, because if you take the moral high ground with them and demonstrate to them that there's a better way that they could be interacting with you through the example you set to them, then all you're doing is giving them another reason to be jealous of you. Oh, look, this person thinks they're better than me. Typical. So it's really hard to not feed into that. The only thing that you can do about a friendship where jealousy has seriously crept in and seriously taken root, besides separating yourself from that person and that situation, is to minimize your accomplishments, make yourself small, make yourself meek. And this is something that you should never ever have to do for somebody who is apparently your friend and has your back. You should never be expected to do this. So really, this last solution to jealousy is not a solution at all. Obviously it's wrong to be boastful, and in situations where you've got something that another person really wanted, to rub it in and be like a sore winner, that's not very nice. But that's different to just being happy because something good has happened for you, and being happy to share that joy with other people, and finding instead that they aren't happy for you and they only see what they don't have. It's not fair for you to not be able to celebrate your own accomplishments in life because of how it might make somebody else feel who's not in control of their own emotions and who doesn't have their own psychological baggage, their own karma under control. And of course, now knowing how bad jealousy is, how it's such a toxic and negative trait to have, you ought to also ask yourself, am I jealous? Is this something that exists in me? And if the answer is yes, it's really something that you need to overcome in yourself. Not only because it's bad for the person that you're jealous of, but also because it's not good for you. It's not good for you psychologically to always feel like you're lesser than other people and compare yourself unfavorably to other people and letting that eat you up inside. It's not a good feeling. And there's so many different ways that you can look to somebody who's more successful than you than to simply be jealous of them. There's ways that you can turn that comparison into a kind of inspiration and a motivation to be more like that person, to lift yourself up rather than tearing the other person down. And I'm going to do an entire video on the ways that you can address jealousy in yourself and transform that into something that's more positive and constructive in your own life. So stay tuned for that. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for listening. Leave your comments down below as per usual. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button if you support what I'm doing on this channel, and I'll see you next time.